The sun hung low over the cracked asphalt of Route 17, casting long shadows across the roadside memorial like fingers clawing at forgotten secrets. A cluster of weathered crosses leaned against a chain-link fence, adorned with faded ribbons and plastic flowers that fluttered in the hot desert wind. There, amid the dust and the distant rumble of passing trucks, stood a girl no older than 10, her dark hair tangled and her small frame trembling. Lila Moreno clutched a crumpled photo to her chest, tears carving clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. She was alone, utterly, heartbreakingly alone, whispering pleas to the wind as if it might carry her words to someone, anyone, who could make the ache in her heart stop. The air smelled of dry earth and exhaust, and the fear in her eyes spoke of nights spent hiding from shadows that shouldn't exist for a child. If this story's pulling at your heart already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got a tale of honor and hidden truths unfolding, and you won't want to miss a moment. Caleb Ash Torres throttled down his Harley, the engine's growl softening to a purr as his convoy of Iron Promise riders crested the rise. They were en route from a veterans' ride in the hills, a brotherhood forged in the fires of old wars and older oaths, when the sight hit them like a punch to the gut. Ash, at 42, bore the scars of those battles etched into his weathered face. A jagged line across his jaw from shrapnel, eyes shadowed by losses he never spoke of. His cut, the leather vest emblazoned with the Iron Promise patch, a clenched fist around a broken chain, hung heavy on his broad shoulders. He'd ridden with the club for 2 decades, chasing the horizon to outrun the ghosts, but today something pulled him to stop. The girl. Her isolation screamed louder than any siren. The convoy halted in a thunderous symphony of brakes and kicking stands, 50 bikes forming a steel wall against the empty road. Riders dismounted, their boots crunching gravel, faces hardening at the sight of the child. Ash was the first to approach, his strides measured, hands open to show he meant no harm. The others, veterans like Jax with his prosthetic arm, and Lena, the club's medic who patched more than wounds, fanned out, scanning the horizon for threats. "Hey, kid," Ash said softly, kneeling to her level, his voice roughened by years of wind and smoke, but laced with a gentleness he'd reserved for his own long-gone niece. "You okay? What's got you out here by yourself?" Lila's eyes, wide and red-rimmed, flicked up to meet his. She didn't run, didn't scream, just studied him as if weighing his soul against the photo in her grip. The wind tugged at her faded sundress, and up close, Ash saw the faint bruises on her arms, signs of aggression that twisted his gut like a knife. No child should carry marks like that, not in a world that pretended to protect the innocent. "My uncle," she whispered, her voice barely cutting through the hum of idling engines. "He rides too, like you." Ash's breath caught, a flicker of something ancient stirring in his chest. Riders? Here? On this stretch of nowhere? He glanced at his crew, who had formed a loose circle, their presence a shield against whatever had left her stranded. Jax nodded subtly, his eyes on the road, while Lena crouched nearby, offering a water bottle with a reassuring smile. But Lila's words hung in the air, pulling at threads Ash had buried deep. "Your uncle rides with who?" he asked, keeping his tone steady, though his pulse quickened. She hesitated, then held out the photo with trembling hands. It was creased and worn, the edges frayed from too many secret glances. Ash took it carefully, his calloused fingers brushing hers. The image showed a man in his 30s, lean and sharp-featured, straddling a bike under a blazing sun. He wore a cut much like Ash's, black leather, the Iron Promise emblem clear as day. But stitched below it was a chapter patch. Desert Ghosts. Ash's blood ran cold. The Desert Ghosts chapter had been scrubbed from the club's history a decade ago, dissolved in whispers of scandal, its members scattered or silenced. Officially, it never existed. The man's face. It hit Ash like a freight train. Marco Reyes, his brother-in-arms from the sands of war, the one who'd saved Ash's life in a firefight that still haunted his dreams. The world narrowed to that photo, the colors vivid against the faded memorial. Marco's smile was easy, his eyes crinkling with the kind of loyalty that didn't fade. Ash's face paled, the desert heat forgotten as memories flooded back, their last ride together, the oath sworn under starlit skies. "If anything happens to me, look after my family," Marco had said, clapping Ash on the shoulder after a close call with a corrupt contractor hauling supplies for the bases. Marco had refused to falsify logs, to cover up shipments that smelled of graft and worse. Days later, he vanished. No body found, no traces left, just a void in the records, as if he'd never been. Lila watched him, her small voice cutting through the roar in his ears. He promised he'd come back, but they said he ran away. I know he didn't. This photo, it's all I have. Her words carried the weight of unspoken pain, the kind that festered in silence. Ash's hand tightened on the image, the leather of his glove creaking. That promise, Marco's promise, and Ash's own unspoken vow to stand by his brother's kin, had survived the years, buried but unbroken. The Iron Promise wasn't just a club, it was a code, a family chosen in the crucible of honor. And now, this child's whisper cracked open a door long sealed. The convoy shifted restlessly behind him, engines coughing back to life as Jax approached. "Ash, what's the play?" His voice was low, laced with the unspoken understanding of men who'd stared down worse than ghosts. Ash stood slowly, pocketing the photo like a talisman. The sun dipped lower, painting the crosses in blood-red light, and the air thickened with the scent of gasoline and resolve. "We take her somewhere safe," he said, his tone steel. "And we dig. The ghosts aren't forgotten, not on my watch." Lila reached for his hand, her trust fragile but real. And in that moment, Ash felt the pull of redemption, a quiet force that would drag the truth from the shadows, no matter the cost. The road ahead stretched infinite, but for the first time in years, it led somewhere that mattered. The engines roared back to life in a chorus of thunder, the Iron Promise convoy transforming the desolate stretch of Route 17 into a fortress on wheels. Dust billowed like smoke signals as the 50 riders formed up, their bikes a gleaming phalanx under the dying sun. Caleb Ash Torres lifted Lila Moreno onto the back of his Harley, her small arms wrapping tentatively around his waist, the photo of Marco Reyes tucked safely in his vest pocket. The weight of her trust pressed against him, heavier than any saddlebag, stirring echoes of promises he'd made in the dim glow of barracks, half a world away. The air hummed with the scent of hot metal and sagebrush, and as they pulled away from the memorial, the crosses receded like silent sentinels, watching over secrets too long buried. Lila's cheek rested against Ash's back, her breathing steadying with the rhythm of the road. The convoy moved as one, a rolling brotherhood that cut through the twilight like a blade. Jax rode point, his prosthetic arm glinting as he scanned the mirrors for tails, while Lena flanked Ash's left, her eyes sharp on the girl. The club had seen its share of strays, war orphans, runaways from broken homes, but this felt different, laced with the ghosts of their own erased history. Ash's mind raced ahead, piecing together fragments. Marco's refusal to sign off on those tainted logs, the shipments rerouted under the cover of night, whispers of a contractor who'd bought silence with threats. The Desert Ghosts chapter had unraveled in the aftermath, branded a liability and struck from the books. But oaths didn't dissolve so easily. They lingered like engine oil on calloused hands. They veered off the highway toward Willow Creek, a dusty town huddled in the shadow of red rock cliffs, where the Iron Promise kept a safe house disguised as an old garage. The building squatted at the edge of town, its corrugated walls scarred by sandstorms, the faint outline of a faded promise patch visible only to those who knew to look. As the convoy rolled in, Floodlights snapped on, bathing the lot in harsh yellow. Riders dismounted in a synchronized dance, securing the perimeter with the efficiency of men who'd guarded more than just machines. Ash eased Lila down, her feet touching gravel with a soft crunch. She blinked up at the gathering faces, a sea of leather and ink, but didn't flinch. "This is home for now," Ash murmured, guiding her inside. The door creaked open to reveal a space alive with the aroma of fresh coffee and motor oil, walls lined with tool benches and maps pinned like battle plans. Inside, the air cooled, carrying the low murmur of voices as the crew settled. Lena knelt beside Lila, offering a blanket and a mug of hot chocolate that steamed like a peace offering. "You're safe here, sweetheart. No one's gonna hurt you." The girl's eyes, still shadowed by the day's terror, softened at the warmth in Lena's voice. She'd patched up enough club members to know the fragility of trust, her own scars hidden under medic patches earned in field hospitals overseas. Jax leaned against a workbench, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on Ash. "That photo, it's Marco, isn't it? The one who went dark after pushing back on that hauler gig." His words hung heavy, pulling nods from the others. Whispers rippled through the room. Vets who'd ridden with the ghosts. Mechanics who'd heard the rumors of payoffs and vanishings. Ash nodded, unfolding the photo under the harsh bulb light. Marco's image stared back, defiant even in stillness, his bike's chrome catching an imagined dawn. "Yeah, and this is his niece. Lila's got his fire." He met her eyes, seeing the same unyielding spark that had pulled Marco through ambushes and betrayals. The room quieted as Ash recounted what he could, haltingly, like dislodging rusted parts. The Desert Ghosts had been the club's frontier arm, hauling aid and supplies through backcountry routes, until the contractor's demands turned sour. Falsified logs to hide diverted cargo, routes that skirted oversight. Marco had drawn the line, citing the code. Iron Promise stood for breaking chains, not forging new ones. His stand cost him everything. Disappearance chalked up to desertion, chapter disbanded overnight. But Ash remembered the night before. Beers shared under a canopy of stars. Marco's hand on his shoulder. "Watch my blood if I'm gone, brother. They're family too." Lila's voice broke the tension, small but steady. "He left this for me. Said if I ever needed help, find the promise." She pointed to a faint inscription on the photo's back, etched in Marco's precise script. "Ride true." The words landed like a gavel, igniting murmurs of agreement. This wasn't just a lost chapter. It was a fracture in their soul, a truth erased to protect the powerful. Ash felt the pull of redemption coiling in his chest, the kind that demanded action over regret. "We rebuild it," he said, voice rising to cut the doubt. "Piece by piece, logs, witnesses, whatever's left. No more ghosts." The crew straightened, fists thumping tables in solidarity. A family chosen, bound by more than blood. But as the night deepened, shadows lengthened in Ash's mind. He stepped out to the lot, the cool air biting through his cut. Stars wheeling overhead like distant witnesses. Lila followed, clutching a worn stuffed bear, her presence a quiet anchor. "Do you think he's out there?" she asked, gazing at the horizon where the road vanished into black. Ash crouched, the gravel digging into his knees. "I think promises like his don't break, they wait." In the distance, a lone headlight flickered, scout from the convoy. Or something else? Paranoia prickled, remnants of old ops where trust was a luxury. The contractor's reach had been long, tentacles into ports and ledgers, and erasing a chapter meant erasing threats. If Marco's stand had painted a target, Lila's whisper just lit the fuse. Back inside, the planning began in earnest. Maps unrolled across a scarred table. Markers tracing faded routes through canyons and forgotten depots. Jax pulled up encrypted logs on a battered laptop, cross-referencing dates that the official records had scrubbed. Lena tended to Lila's minor marks with gentle salves, her touch a balm against the world's rough edges. Whispers of corruption surfaced, shipments rerouted to shadow buyers, favors called in from high places. The desert ghosts hadn't just dissolved. They'd been dismantled, members reassigned or warned off with veiled threats. One rider, an old-timer named Reyes, no relation, just fate's irony, recalled a midnight meet where Marco had handed over a hidden drive. Data on the halls, proof of the graft. He said it'd burn them if it ever saw light. Ash's resolve hardened with each revelation, the photo burning a hole in his pocket. This child's plea had unearthed a legacy of loyalty, turning personal grief into a crusade. The iron promise would ride not for vengeance, but for honor, to restore what was taken, to honor the oath that bound them. As the first hints of dawn crept over the cliffs, painting the garage in soft gold, Ash watched Lila sleep on a cot, her face peaceful for the first time. The road ahead twisted with peril, but in the quiet before the storm, he felt the weight of family, chosen, unbreakable, settle like a well-worn glove. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. Dawn broke over Willow Creek like a reluctant confession, the first rays slicing through the garage's grimy windows and casting striped shadows across the scarred wooden table. The air inside hummed with the low buzz of fluorescent lights and the clink of coffee mugs mingling with the faint acrid tang of yesterday's engine exhaust that still clung to the rider's leathers. Caleb, Ash. Torres stood by the open door, his silhouette framed against the rising cliffs, watching as Lila stirred on her cot. Her stuffed bear lay clutched in her arms, a small guardian against the night's uncertainties. Sleep had softened the edges of her fear, but Ash knew better. Promises like Marco's didn't erase scars, they just gave reason to carry them. The Iron Promise crew moved with purposeful quiet, a rhythm honed from years of dawn patrols and midnight vigils. Jax hunched over the laptop, his fingers tapping keys with the precision of a man diffusing more than data. Encrypted files flickered on the screen, fragments of old routes and manifests pieced together from backups the club had squirreled away in defiance of the official purge. Lena busied herself in the corner, packing a medkit with steady hands, her eyes flicking occasionally to Lila. The old-timer Reyes, no kin to Marco, but bound by the same unyielding code, spread a dog-eared ledger across the table, its pages yellowed and edges frayed like forgotten battle flags. "These halls," he muttered, tracing a line with a grease-stained finger. "They started clean. Aid drops, supply runs for the outposts. Then the contractor twisted it, reroutes to ghost depots, logs doctored to hide the bleed." Ash stepped back inside, the gravel crunching under his boots, and joined them. The photo of Marco lay centered on the table like a compass, its image pulling them all into orbit. Lila padded over, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her bare feet silent on the cool concrete, she climbed onto a stool beside Ash, peering at the maps with a curiosity that belied her age. "Uncle Marco drew lines like that," she said softly, her voice threading through the murmurs. "He'd show me on napkins, saying the road keeps secrets but tells truth to those who listen." Her words landed with quiet force, stirring nods from the group. In a world that had tried to silence her uncle, this child carried his echo unbowed. They dove deeper, the morning unfolding in a tapestry of revelations. Jax cross-referenced timestamps from the ledger against satellite logs pulled from a secure server, shadowy records the club maintained off-grid, a hedge against the very corruption that had claimed the desert ghosts. One entry stood out. A convoy run 3 days before Marco's vanishing, flagged for anomalous diversion to an unmarked warehouse near the border. "Contractor's shell company," Jack said, his voice gravelly with restrained anger. "They paid off inspectors, buried the manifests. Marco's signature's the last clean one, refused to sign the falsified sheet. Reyes leaned in, his weathered face creasing. I was there that night. He handed me a copy of the real logs, said to hold it till the time was right, burned a bridge to save the rest of us. Ash's jaw tightened, the memory of that handoff resurfacing like smoke from a dying fire. They'd stood in a moonlit lot, engines idling low, the desert night alive with the chirp of crickets and the distant howl of coyotes. Marco's eyes had burned with that fierce clarity, the kind forged in foxholes where loyalty was the only armor. Keep it safe, Ash, for the club, for my blood. Ash had nodded then. Pocketing the drive Marco slipped him, but doubt had crept in later. Whispers from higher up that the ghosts were a risk, better dissolved than defended. He'd buried it deep, telling himself it was for the greater good. But now, with Lila's gaze on him, regret tasted like bitter ash. A low rumble from outside shattered the focus, drawing all eyes to the door. The convoy's scouts had returned, 2 riders pulling up on dust-caked bikes, their faces taut under helmets. One dismounted swiftly, striding in with a nod to Ash. Tail on the horizon, boss. Black SUV, unmarked. Hung back 2 miles out. Lost them in the canyons, but they're sniffing. The words rippled through the room like a warning shot, hands instinctively drifting to sidearms holstered beneath cuts. Lena scooped Lila closer, her arm a protective barrier, while Jack snapped the laptop shut. The contractor's shadow loomed long, its reach a web of influence that had snuffed chapters and lives without a trace. If they'd erased Marco, a child's photo and a garage full of bikers wouldn't deter them. Ash's mind raced, calculating risks in the way of old ops. Flank left, cover the rear, trust the line. We move, he decided, his voice cutting clean through the tension. Split the crew, half-ride decoy east, draw eyes. Rest head to the old ghost depot, Reyes you lead. Jax, you and me take Lila to the ridge overlook, sync the data there. The plan unfolded with crisp efficiency, riders gearing up in a flurry of zippers and buckles, the scent of leather sharpening in the warming air. Lila clutched Ash's hand as he lifted her toward his bike, her trust a fragile flame he vowed not to let gutter. We'll find the truth, he murmured, the words as much for himself as her. Your uncle's promise starts with us. They rolled out in staggered waves, the garage emptying into the sun-baked lots. Engines snarled to life, a defiant symphony against the encroaching quiet. Ash throttled gently, Lila's arms secure around him. The road ahead, winding through scrubland dotted with Joshua trees like silent watchers. The wind whipped past, carrying the dry scent of creosote and freedom, but beneath it lurked the undercurrent of pursuit, a reminder that truths unearthed often came with teeth. At the ridge, they crested a rise overlooking the valley, the depot's skeletal remains visible in the distance. Rusted silos and chain-link ghosts of forgotten halls. Jax pulled up beside them, scanning with binoculars. Clear for now, but look, fresh tracks down there. Someone's been digging or covering. Ash dismounted, helping Lila down, her eyes fixed on the horizon with a mix of hope and ache. The photo burned in his pocket, a talisman urging them forward. As they descended toward the site, the sun climbed higher, baking the earth and illuminating cracks in the facade of erasure. Marco's stand hadn't been in vain. It had waited, patient as the desert itself, for kin to call it back to life. But in the shimmer of heat waves, a glint caught Ash's eye, metal hidden in the brush, a clue or a trap. The line between redemption and reckoning blurred, pulling them deeper into the promise's unyielding grip. The sun beat down on the ridge like a relentless interrogator, turning the air into a shimmering haze that distorted the valley below. Caleb Ash Torres shielded his eyes, the binoculars pressed to his face, revealing the depot's ruins in stark relief, skeletal silos leaning like drunken sentinels. chain link fences sagging under years of neglect, and patches of scrub encroaching on cracked concrete pads where trucks once idled. Fresh tire tracks scarred the earth, meandering from the access road to a cluster of overgrown weeds near the main shed. A deliberate path, not the random wander of scavengers. Lila clung to Ash's leg, her small hand warm against his jeans, the stuffed bear dangling from her other arm like a talisman. The wind carried the faint metallic tang of rust and something sharper, like disturbed soil after rain. Jax lowered his own binoculars, his prosthetic arm whirring softly as he adjusted the focus. Those tracks are recent, last day or two by the edges, SUV treads, heavy, covering ground, not just poking around. His voice was a low rumble, edged with the caution of a man who'd scouted too many ambushes. Behind them, the decoy riders had peeled off eastward, their engines fading into the distance like echoes of a diversion. The core group, Ash, Jax, Reyes, Lena, and a handful of trusted vets, had pressed on, bikes parked in a concealed dip to avoid silhouetting against the sky. The silence pressed in, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk wheeling overhead, its shadow fleeting across the baked ground. Ash handed the binoculars to Lila, who peered through them with wide-eyed intensity, her breath fogging the lenses. "See that glint? In the brush by the shed." She nodded, pointing with a finger that trembled not from fear, but focus. Marco's lessons had taken root in her, turning a child's curiosity into a quiet resolve. Ash felt a pang in his chest, the weight of that inherited fire reminding him why they'd come this far. The photo in his pocket felt heavier now, a fragment of proof against the erasure that had swallowed the desert ghosts. "Stay close," he said, his tone brooking no argument as they descended the ridge on foot, boots crunching over loose shale that skittered like whispers. The path wound down through jagged outcrops, the air growing thicker with the scent of creosote and sun-warmed stone. Reyes took point, his steps measured, hand hovering near the holster at his belt. The old-timer's eyes, sharp despite the crow's feet, scanned for tripwires or fresh breaks in the undergrowth, habits from halls that had skirted more than borders. Lena brought up the rear, her medkit slung over one shoulder, a silent guardian whose presence steadied the group like an anchor in rough seas. As they neared the fence, the glint resolved into something tangible, a length of chrome pipe, half buried in the dirt. Its surface pitted but unmistakable, part of a bike's exhaust, sheared clean as if by force. Ash knelt, brushing away the dust with gloved hands. The metal was cool beneath the grime, etched with faint scratches that caught the light. "This isn't junk," he murmured, tracing the curve. "Custom work, like the setups Marco ran." Memories surfaced unbidden, late-night tweaks in the ghost's garage. Laughter cutting through the clang of tools, Marco's voice steady as he welded reinforcements for runs through bandit country. That pipe had been part of his rig, the one he'd roared off on the night he vanished. The realization hit like a backdraft, heat rising in Ash's throat, not just a clue, a remnant left or planted to taunt. Lila crouched beside him, her fingers hovering but not touching. He fixed things like this, said every piece tells a story. Her words hung in the still air, pulling the group's focus tighter. Jax circled the shed, peering through a rusted gap in the door. Inside's been tossed, shelves down, papers scattered. But look, burn marks on the floor. Someone torched files, sloppy job. He kicked the door open with a booted foot, the hinges screeching in protest. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that pierced the gloom, illuminating stacks of charred manifests and toppled crates. The air inside was stale, laced with the char of old paper and something chemical, like accelerant hastily scrubbed. They fanned out, methodical as a sweep team, sifting through the debris. Reyes unearthed a singed folder from beneath a beam, its label faded but legible. Route diversions, Contractor Alpha. Inside, fragments of logs survived the flames, handwritten notes in Marco's script, cross-hatching discrepancies between official manifests and actual hauls. "Here," Reyes said, voice thick with vindication. "Proof of the reroutes, supplies meant for outposts funneled to private buyers." Marco flagged it all, dates, plate numbers, even a name. Harlan Voss, the contractor's point man. The name landed like a stone in still water, ripples of recognition spreading. Voss had been a ghost in club lore, a suit with ties to oversight boards, the kind who bought loyalty with envelopes and threats. Ash's pulse quickened, the pieces slotting into a grim mosaic. Marco hadn't deserted. He'd been a threat. His refusal to falsify the logs, a spark that could ignite the whole rotten network. The chapter's dissolution hadn't been internal rot. It was a purge, sanctioned from above, to bury the evidence. Doubt gnawed at Ash, a psychological thorn. How many times had he looked the other way, chalking it up to club survival? Staring at the folder, he saw his own complicity reflected. The scars of inaction deeper than any shrapnel. But Lila's presence sharpened the edge. Her uncle's stand demanded more than regret. It called for restitution. A sharp crack echoed from outside, the snap of a branch under weight. Jax froze, signaling silence, his free hand dropping to his sidearm. The group converged at the door, backs to the walls, breaths held. Through the gap, a shadow shifted in the brush. Not wind, but deliberate movement. Lena pulled Lila behind a crate, her whisper fierce. "Stay down, kid. We've got this." Ash edged forward, heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs, the chrome pipe now gripped like a club. The air thickened with tension, ethical lines blurring. Were they unearthing truth or stepping into a snare? The shadow resolved into a figure, a lone rider on a battered dirt bike, helmet obscured by dust, engine cut to idle. He raised gloved hands slowly, palms out, as the iron promise closed in. "Not here to fight," the man called, voice muffled but familiar, pulling off his helmet to reveal a face lined with the same desert wear as their own. Thomas Hale, a Ghost alum who'd gone quiet after the disband. "Heard you were digging. Marco left me a message, said if the promise came back, show you this." He tossed a small drive from his pocket, its surface scarred but intact. Data, more proof, a lifeline from the grave. Ash caught it mid-air, the weight light but loaded, relief warred with suspicion, the moral suspense coiling tighter. Hale's eyes flicked to Lila, softening. For his niece, he never broke. In that exchange, the chosen family knit closer, bonds reforged in the heat of revelation. But as they pocketed the drive and withdrew, the SUV tracks loomed larger in Ash's mind. Voss's web tightening. The depot had given them fragments of honor's legacy, but the road to full redemption stretched shadowed and unforgiving, demanding sacrifices that tested the soul. If this story's gripping you, smash that like button. It helps spread these tales of loyalty and truth far and wide. The drive's data unspooled like a hidden vein of ore under the dim glow of Jax's laptop screen. The garage in Willow Creek transformed into a war room once more. Afternoon light slanted through the half-open shutters, painting the concrete floor in bars of gold and shadow, while the air hung heavy with the scent of cooling engines and stale takeout wrappers from a hasty lunch. Caleb Ash Torres leaned over the table, his broad frame casting a long eclipse across the flickering pixels, the weight of Thomas Hale's unexpected alliance still settling like dust after a storm. Lila sat cross-legged on a nearby crate, her stuffed bear propped beside her like a silent co-conspirator, eyes fixed on the screen with the unblinking focus of someone piecing together a puzzle her uncle had left half-solved. Jax's fingers danced across the keys, decrypting layers with a series of soft chimes that echoed the quiet tension in the room. Reyes paced the perimeter, his boots scuffing the floor in rhythmic unease. While Lena monitored a radio scanner, its static whispers a constant undercurrent. The drive held more than fragments. It was a digital archive, manifests cross-referenced with audio clips and grainy photos snapped from helmet cams. "Listen to this," Jack said, his voice a gravelly anchor as he hit play. Marco's recorded voice crackled through the speakers, steady amid the rumble of a convoy. "Log entry 47. Diversion confirmed. Voss's crew rerouted the full load to Sector 9. No aid reaching the posts. This ends with us, brothers. Iron holds." The words faded into engine roar, leaving a hush that pressed against their chests like an unspoken accusation. Ash's scarred jaw clenched, the audio stirring the embers of guilt he'd banked for years. Marco's stand hadn't been reckless. It was the moral spine the club had needed, a refusal to let corruption chain their purpose. The files painted Voss as the architect, a slick operator with ties to oversight panels, funneling military-grade supplies to black-market buyers under the guise of legitimate contracts. Names surfaced: complicit inspectors, silenced witnesses, even a forged dissolution order for the Desert Ghosts, stamped with a date that aligned perfectly with Marco's vanishing. "They didn't just erase him," Ash murmured, tracing a finger over a blurred photo of Voss, shaking hands with a suited figure at a remote airstrip. "They buried the whole damn truth to protect the flow." The revelation twisted like a knife, forcing Ash to confront his own silence. The nights he'd ridden away from the whispers, prioritizing the club's fragile peace over the oath to his brother-in-arms. Lila leaned forward, her small hand pointing to a time-stamped entry. "That's the day he didn't come home. See the red mark? He drew those when something was wrong." Her insight cut through the technical haze, a child's clarity illuminating the ethical fog. Marco had embedded personal notes in the margins, reminders of family, sketches of routes that doubled as maps to hidden caches. One led to a canyon overlook marked with a simple fist icon, the promise's symbol. The group absorbed it in silence, the air thickening with the scent of resolve, like oil igniting on a hot manifold. This wasn't abstract graft. It was betrayal of the vulnerable, supplies meant for those in need, siphoned for profit, leaving outposts starved and lives exposed. Ash felt the pull of redemption sharpening, a quiet force demanding he honor the promise, not just to Marco, but to the legacy of integrity the ghosts had embodied. But the data's light cast long shadows. Jack scrolled to a final file, an encrypted video, time-stamped weeks after the chapter's fall. It opened on a dimly lit warehouse, Marco's voice off-screen urging someone to, "Get this out if I don't." The camera panned to crates stamped with aid logos, but inside gleamed components that screamed illicit optics, wiring for drones, tech rerouted from defense stocks. Voss's voice cut in, smooth as polished chrome. "Sign the log, Reyes, or your rides end here." A scuffle blurred the frame, signs of struggle, not violence detailed but implied in the chaos, then static. The video ended abruptly, leaving the room in stunned quiet. Reyes stopped pacing, his face paling. "That was the meat I missed. He went alone." The moral weight settled heavier. The corruption not just institutional but personal, a web that had ensnared friends and fractured oaths. Outside, the sun dipped toward evening, stretching the cliffs into jagged silhouettes that clawed at the sky. The scanner crackled to life, Lena's hand snapping to the dial. Multiple vehicles inbound, 3 SUVs closing from the east, same treads as the depot. Adrenaline surged, the group moving with fluid precision, born of shared scars. Ash scooped Lila up, her arms locking around his neck without hesitation, trust forged in the fire of their shared quest. "To the bikes!" he ordered, voice low and unyielding. Jax pocketed the drive, Reyes grabbing the ledger as they burst into the lot. Engines fired in a staccato burst. The convoy peeling out in a controlled chaos, tires spitting gravel, the roar drowning the approaching hum of engines. They tore through Willow Creek's back streets, the town blurring into a haze of adobe walls and flickering neon signs. Ash led the flank, Lila's whisper hot against his ear. "Uncle said ride true, means no turning back." Her words steadied him as the SUVs crested a rise behind. Black shapes slicing through the dusk like predators scenting blood. Jack signaled a split, half the riders veering into arroyos to draw fire, their taillights winking out like decoys. Ash pushed harder, the Harley thundering over rutted dirt, wind whipping the scent of sage and sweat. Bullets pinged off rock faces in the distance, not aimed to kill, but to warn. A psychological prod to scatter and forget. At the canyon overlook, they crested under a sky-bruised purple, the marked cache site, a shadowed alcove below. Dismounting swiftly, Ash lowered Lila behind a boulder, his hand lingering on her shoulder. "Stay put. This ends the hiding." The group descended, flashlights cutting the gloom to reveal a weathered lockbox half buried in sand, Marco's final safeguard. Inside, a sealed envelope, crisp against the grit, addressed to "The Promise for Lila's Sake." Ash broke the seal, unfolding pages dense with affidavits, witness statements from ghosts who'd fled but not forgotten. Voss's empire laid bare, bribes, threats, a trail leading to boardrooms far from the dust. But the SUV's engines growled closer, lights piercing the canyon like accusatory beams. Jax raised his sidearm, Reyes covering the rear, Lena shielding Lila with unyielding calm. Ash stood tall, the documents clutched like a shield, the moral crossroads stark, run with the truth and risk the family's fragile peace, or stand and shatter the chains Voss had forged. A voice boomed from a megaphone. "Hand over the girl and the drive. Walk away clean." Voss's men, enforcers in tactical gear, fanned out. Authority corrupted, justice twisted to serve the powerful. Ash's response was a steady gaze into the dark, the weight of promises old and new coiling in his gut. Iron doesn't bend. The first shot cracked the night, not from his side but a warning ricochet, the standoff teetering on the edge of reckoning. Lila's hand found his in the shadows, her whisper a beacon. "For Uncle." In that moment, redemption ignited, not in fury, but in the quiet honor of facing the storm, family chosen standing as one against the tide of erasure. The canyon echoed with the promise's unbreaking roar. The truth no longer buried but rising, fierce and unforgiving. The canyon's walls amplified the megaphone's demand into a hollow bellow, the words slicing through the cooling night air like a dull blade. Shadows stretched long under the emerging stars, the SUV's headlights carving harsh tunnels of light that pinned the Iron Promise riders against the rock face. Caleb Ash Torres stood at the forefront, the sealed envelope from Marco's cash gripped in one hand, its edges crinkling under the pressure of his calloused fingers. The scent of heated stone and gun oil hung thick, mingling with the faint, earthy whisper of the wind, funneling through the narrow pass. Lila pressed close behind him, her small frame a steady warmth against his leg, her breath quick but even. Trust in the chosen family, a shield stronger than any boulder. Voss's enforcers advanced in a loose semicircle, tactical vests glinting under the beams, their movements deliberate, like wolves circling a wounded pride. The lead man, broad-shouldered with a face obscured by a balaclava, raised a hand to halt his team, the megaphone dangling at his side. "Last chance, Torres. The kid's got nothing you need. Walk, and we forget this canyon ever happened." His voice carried the false civility of authority bought and paid for, a thin veneer over the corruption that had erased chapters and lives. Jax flanked Ash to the right, sidearm drawn low but steady, his prosthetic arm a silent testament to battles where lines blurred between ally and enemy. Reyes covered the left, breath controlled, eyes scanning for weak points in the formation. Lena held Lila firm, her medics calm, a quiet anchor amid the rising pulse of confrontation. Ash's mind raced through the ethical maze, the drive's revelations burning fresh. Voss's network not just siphoning supplies, but leveraging them for leverage. Threats to families, whispers of reprisal that had scattered the ghosts like chaff. Handing over Lila would end the immediate threat, preserve the club's fragile truce with the shadows above. But Marco's envelope, heavy with affidavits from vanished witnesses, demanded more, a stand for the moral justice that had defined their oaths. The first shot's echo still lingered, a ricochet off the canyon rim that had scattered pebbles like warnings. No blood spilled yet, but the air crackled with the potential, a psychological standoff where surrender meant chaining the truth forever. "Iron doesn't bend," Ash repeated, his voice projecting clear and unyielding, carrying over the enforcer's shuffle. He stepped forward into the light, the envelope raised like a flag of defiance. Lila's hand tightened on his, her whisper threading through the tension. "Uncle said stand true, for the ones who can't." Her words, simple as a child's vow, ignited something deep in Ash, a redemption uncoiling from years of buried regret. He'd failed Marco once, letting the dissolution slide to protect the broader promise. No more. The crew shifted subtly, a wall of leather and resolve, their presence a chosen family woven tighter by the night's forge. The lead enforcer hesitated, his posture stiffening as headlights caught the envelope's stark white against Ash's dark cut. "That's not yours to hold," he growled, signaling his men to close in. Boots crunched on gravel, weapons glinting, but Jax's voice cut sharp from the side. "One step, and we light this pass up. You want Voss's secrets buried? Fine, but they stay with us." The bluff held weight. The decoy riders could loop back, turning the canyon into a kill box. Reyes added a low rumble. "We know about the airstrip handshakes, the bribes to the boards. Marco's logs don't lie. The names from the drive hung in the air, psychological barbs pricking at the enforcer's facade. Doubt flickered in the lead man's eyes, the corruption's underbelly exposed not by force, but by the unbreaking honor of those who'd been erased. A tense beat stretched, the wind moaning through the rocks like a held breath. Then, from the shadows beyond the SUVs, a new engine growled, low and familiar, cutting through the standoff like a lifeline. Tomas Hale burst from a side arroyo on his dirt bike, flanked by two more ghosts' alums who'd answered the unspoken call, their machines kicking up dust devils in the headlights. "Not alone anymore," Hale shouted, pulling up short, hands visible but defiant. The enforcers whirled, caught off guard, their formation fracturing as the newcomers formed a rear guard. Hale tossed a second drive toward Ash, its arc catching the light. Marco's backup planted it after the video, for this moment. The addition tipped the scales, the moral suspense resolving into a fragile equilibrium. Voss's men conferred in hushed tones, the megaphone silent, their authority cracking under the weight of multiplied witnesses. The lead enforcer spat a curse, backing toward the vehicles. "This isn't over. Voss plays long." Engines revved in retreat, taillights receding into the canyon's throat, leaving only the echo of tires on stone and the acrid tang of exhaust. No shots fired in earnest, no bodies claimed, just a poetic justice in the truth's quiet advance, forcing the shadows to yield ground. Ash exhaled, the tension bleeding from his shoulders as the group converged. Lila emerged from Lena's hold, her eyes bright with the night's victory. "They ran," she said, awe threading her voice, but Ash knelt to her level, the envelope secure in his vest. "Not ran, deferred. Promises like your uncle's, they wait, but they win." The crew gathered the drives and affidavits, the cache's contents now an arsenal of redemption. proof enough to challenge the corruption at its root, to restore the desert ghosts not as myth, but legacy. Hale clasped Ash's forearm, the grip of brothers reforged. He knew you'd come back for it, for her. As they mounted up, the canyon's walls seemed to lean in, guardians of secrets unearthed. The road out twisted under a starlit canopy, the convoys rumble, a defiant hymn. But Ash's thoughts lingered on the retreating lights, Voss's web unbroken, only dented. The drive home to Willow Creek carried new weight, alliances mended, truths amplified, but the final reckoning loomed, a sacrifice of honor demanding one last stand. Lila's arms around his waist felt like the future itself, fragile yet fierce, pulling them toward the promise's unyielding dawn. The first hints of pre-dawn light filtered through the canyon's jagged rims, turning the sky a bruised indigo as the Iron Promise convoy wound back toward Willow Creek. Caleb Ash Torres throttled low, the Harley's steady thrum vibrating through his frame like a heartbeat syncing with the road. Lila's arms encircled his waist, her cheek pressed against the worn leather of his cut. The warmth of her trust, a quiet counterpoint to the chill wind slicing across the scrublands. Behind them, the riders formed a loose wedge, Jax at point, Reyes and Hale flanking the rear, Lena's bike a steady shadow with the medkit strapped secure. The drives and affidavits rode in sealed packs, their digital weight heavier than any saddlebag, carrying Marco's unyielding legacy toward the light. Dust from the night's evasion still clung to their clothes, mingling with the sharp scent of creosote bushes stirred by the breeze. The retreating SUVs had vanished into the horizon, but their echo lingered in Ash's mind. A deferred storm, Voss's corruption not shattered but prodded, waiting to coil back. The canyon overlook had given them the fragments, but true redemption demanded assembly, a moral forge to temper the truth into something unbreakable. Lila stirred slightly, her voice a soft murmur against the engine's growl. "Did we win, Ash? For Uncle?" He glanced back, catching her eyes in the side mirror, wide and searching under the faint glow of passing stars. "Not yet, kid, but we're riding the right road now." They crested the final rise into Willow Creek as the sun breached the cliffs, bathing the town in a golden wash that chased shadows from the adobe facades. The garage safehouse stood sentinel at the edge, its corrugated roof catching the light like polished steel. Engines cut to silence in the lot, the riders dismounting with the weary grace of those who'd stared down worse than darkness. Inside, the air warmed with the aroma of brewing coffee and faint traces of motor oil, the scarred table awaiting like an old confidant. Jax fired up the laptop. The screen's blue hue illuminating faces etched with resolve, scars from wars fought and oaths kept. Hale and the alums spread the affidavits, pages rustling like whispers of the ghosts reborn. Lila settled on her crate, the stuffed bear propped as sentinel, while Lena draped a blanket over her shoulders, her touch gentle as a mother's. "Rest easy now, the hard part's behind." But Ash knew better. The psychological toll of unearthed secrets pressed in, forcing reckonings long delayed. He paced to the window, the town stirring below. Early risers firing up trucks, the distant hum of life oblivious to the chains breaking in this room. Marco's video looped in his thoughts, the scuffles implied struggle a ghost that clawed at his conscience. How many rides had he taken without questioning the purge, letting the club's survival eclipse the honor of one man's stand? Jax synced the drives, the full archive unfolding in a cascade of files. Manifests linking Voss's shell companies to diverted halls, audio of coerced sign-offs, even encrypted emails to oversight figures trading silence for shares. "This ties it all," Jack said, his voice steady but laced with the fire of vindication. Voss didn't just siphon supplies, he weaponized the system, leaving outposts vulnerable for profit. Marco's notes name the players, inspectors on payroll, board votes bought quiet. Reyes nodded, his weathered hands steadying a trembling page. He flagged the family threats too, said they'd come for his kin if he pushed. The words landed heavy, eyes turning to Lila, who met them without flinching, her small frame carrying Marco's unbowed spirit. Ash stopped pacing, the pull of redemption coiling tight in his chest. This wasn't vengeance, it was justice poetic and earned, the power of integrity against institutional rot. We don't burn it, he decided, voice cutting the murmurs like a blade through fog. We deliver it, clean, to the ones who can break the chains for good. The plan formed swiftly. Hale's contacts in the veteran networks, neutral ground at a neutral outpost beyond Voss's reach. No raids, no shadows, just truth laid bare, affidavits and data handed over with the weight of the promise's name. The crew murmured agreement, fists thumping the table in solidarity, a chosen family reforged not in blood, but in the quiet strength of standing true. By midday, they rode out again, the convoy leaner but unbreakable, winding through sun-scorched valleys toward the outpost, a weathered way station on the edge of reservation lands, where elders and advocates gathered under flags of truce. The air grew drier, laced with the mineral tang of distant salt flats, the road unspooling like a promise fulfilled. Lila rode with Ash, her whispers of Marco's stories weaving through the wind, easing the scars of doubt that had long shadowed him. At the outpost, dust-caked bikes parked in a respectful arc, the riders entering a low-slung hall alive with the murmur of voices and the scent of sage smouldering in braziers. The handoff unfolded under watchful eyes, neutral mediators, faces lined with the wisdom of overlooked battles. Ash stepped forward, envelope and drives extended, his voice steady as he recounted the ghost's erasure, Marco's stand, the child's plea that had reignited it all. "This isn't for us alone," he said, meeting the lead advocate's gaze. "It's for the outposts starved, the families threatened, the honor stolen." Lila stood beside him, clutching the photo, her presence the emotional core, a living testament to promises that survived. Whispers rippled through the hall, nods of recognition from those who'd heard the rumors, the moral weight tipping toward exposure. Voss's web, vast as it was, cracked under the light of unassailable proof, the advocates vowing swift channels to oversight boards untainted by graft. As they rode away, the sun arcing high, a weight lifted from Ash's shoulders, not triumph's blaze, but redemption's quiet dawn. Back in Willow Creek that evening, the garage filled with the crew's low laughter, stories shared over cooling engines. The Desert Ghosts chapter symbolically revived in toasts and patched leathers. Lila hugged Ash fiercely, her eyes bright. "You kept it, the promise." He ruffled her hair, the gesture simple but profound, scars of loss softened by the family woven around her. Marco's photo found a place on the wall, beside the Iron Promise emblem, a legacy restored, honor's legacy enduring. In the days that followed, ripples spread. Voss's operations unraveled in quiet indictments, supplies redirected true, chapters like the ghosts etched back into lore. Ash rode the horizons lighter, the road no longer a flight, but a path of purpose. The whisper that started it all, a girl's plea at a roadside memorial, had bloomed into truth's unyielding bloom, proving that in a world of broken chains, loyalty chosen mends what corruption tears. Thank you for riding this journey with us to the end. These stories of honor and hidden truths are brought to life by voices like yours. If Caleb, Ash, Torres, and the Iron Promise moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Join our family of storytellers, and let's keep the promises alive together until the next tale thunders in.